There's a few scenes in movies that Hollywood really loves, like just scenes that pop up all the time in a bunch of different movies. So one of them is that scene when everyone gathers around the lawyer's fancy table and they read off that last will and testament, and everyone's just waiting on pins and needles to see what they inherit. And Hollywood loves this because there's always drama. Like something's going to happen and someone's going to get riled up or upset. So whether I was thinking Gran Torino, Knives Out, I think Budapest Hotel, or just like Harry Potter has one of those. Like, why did Harry Potter get that golden snitch? Or I like just over and over and over again, this scene pops up in Hollywood. And we have a little bit of that in the Bible. You see, Abraham was promised the promised land. He was promised this giant chunk of land, and God says that your descendants are going to inherit this. And so 475 years later, we see that finally happening. Abraham's grandson and great-grandson went into Egypt, and they stayed there for 430 years. Then Moses leads them out of Egypt, and they go right up to the promised land. You guys know the story. They don't make it in. And so 40 years pass, there's this new generation that comes up. And everybody that was 20 or younger is part of this new generation. They walk around the wilderness for 40 years. It's actually just slightly less than that. But then they get again to the edge of the promised land. Moses dies. Joshua leads them into the promised land. And for the next 5-ish years, they just conquer. They just come into this land and they defeat all these evil nations. And we're not talking about this tonight, but it was an incredible act of justice and mercy that God takes out all these evil nations that were doing these despicable things, and he finally gives this land to the people that he promised it to 475-ish years earlier. And so here we see in the book of Joshua starts to hand out all this land. So to the tribe of Judah, he gives this giant chunk, and Manasseh gets this. And so it goes on and on and on like this. And remember, this is the land, it's the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And finally, in Joshua chapter 13, verse 33, we read this. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses did not give an inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance as he had promised them. And tonight, I want to break that verse down because if I'm honest with you, and this isn't something that's going to make me look super holy and spiritual, but I read that, and part of me just felt really bad for the Levites, if I'm honest. Not all of me, but part of me, I know that that's a blessing. I know that that's good. I know that I shouldn't feel that way. And yet, part of me felt like they missed out. These tribes, they each received all this land. And land is something that they could call their own, something that they could pass down, something that they could build on. They could build their wealth. They could build their farms, and they could expand their livestock. They could do all these things. And with that land, that was their own. And Levi, the tribe of Levi, didn't have that. And I know we brought this up last week. I love land. I love the mountains. I love all of this. And my personal dream one day is to have just a few acres of my own. And so part of the reason I felt that way, I'm sure, is tied to this dream that I have. But the Levites they're not given a chunk of land that they own. They receive something different. And again, it's not punishment. It's a blessing. They received the Lord. And the Lord, it says, was their portion, was their inheritance. And this brings up a ton of questions for me. First off, how does that work? How is the Lord your portion? How is the Lord your inheritance? What does that look like? And why them? And furthermore, if the Lord is their portion, should he be my portion? And why is there something in me that kind of wants something more. And I want to really wrestle this verse with you guys tonight, because I don't think I'm alone in this. And I want to go to the Lord and really figure out how to interpret all of this. Because I want the Lord to be my portion, but not just begrudgingly, not just like, yeah, the Lord's my portion, or I don't want to just say that. I want to rejoice in it. How do we get to that place? So let's begin with the Levites. The Levites are different than any other tribe. The way it worked is Israel had 12 tribes, but there's one tribe, Joseph's kids, they split into 2 half tribes. So it's kind of complicated. There's not 13 tribes, there's 12, but kind of, these 2 half tribes. It's weird like that. But the Levites are set apart, and they're called to be a tribe of priests. And a priest is a mediator between us and God. You see, Levi, this tribe, they were called to represent Israel to God and to represent God to Israel. And that was unlike any other tribe, and that was unique to them. See, in the Old Testament, the way it worked is God set up this tabernacle. Eventually, when Israel was more established, he set up a temple. And God chose to live in that tabernacle. Now, we know God he wasn't fully constrained to that tabernacle. It's not like he couldn't hear or see anything else happening outside of it. But he chose to dwell there. His presence lived in that tabernacle. And so if we wanted to interact, if we were just a regular Israelite and we wanted to worship God, we wanted to interact with God, we had to go to a Levite to do that. You see, anyone, someone from Simeon or Judah or any other tribe could go to the tabernacle. They could go to the temple. They could bring a sacrifice to the temple. But then when it came to actually worshiping God and interacting with him, they would hand that sacrifice to a Levite, and then certain Levites would make that sacrifice. If they wanted, they could go to the temple, but they couldn't go inside of the temple and carry out acts of worship in there. Like there was a table of showbread, and there was this lampstand. And regular people like us, well, I should say regular people like every other tribe other than the Levites, they were limited in how they could worship God. But then especially to go into the Holy of Holies where God's presence dwelt, most Israelites just did not have that opportunity. More than that, I want you guys to consider what we did earlier tonight, rather. There's that last song we sang, and it says, "Your presence is all I want." Matt, help me out. It's all I want. You're eating a taco. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're good.
All I need, all I want, all I see.
And without it, I'm not living, right? That, without breathing, that song, I'm sitting there listening to it, and for generation after generation after generation, there were people that was just not a song that they could sing. Because the opportunity that we have to come here and worship God, enter into his presence, was just not available to most Israelites in the Old Testament. There were some unique, special occasions where God poured out his presence, but for the most part, they could not interact with God in that way. But for the Levites, that was their portion. They had that opportunity. They could interact and serve God, and not only represent him to the people, but go to God representing the people. And to this group, God said, as I hand out all these giant pieces of land, and I give it to these groups to own and to make their own and to pass down to you, Levites, I want you just to have me. And I want to, like, what that means is I want you just to have me, because I don't want you to have to take care of all that. because you have something else to take care of. You have me and the duties that I've given you that I want you to focus on. So you just have me, and you have this opportunity that they don't have, but it's also something that I want you to focus on. But more than that, because you don't have those things, you're going to have to rely on me. And you're going to have to lean into me and my provision and the way I've laid out for you to be taken care of. And that partially that was through tithes, and that was other people bringing forth offerings, and the Levites lived off of that. But I want you to be in that place for a second where God says, I've given you this portion where you are called to serve me, be my mediators between God and between me and the people. And I want you to rely on me to take care of you, not on any of these other things. Would that be enough for you? What's going through your heart? Would that be enough for you to be known for serving God and others, but not necessarily known for all these other things that everyone else in Israel may be known for? You know, our portion, the things that we're known for, our inheritance, our legacy, like all of that's wrapped into it. When I think about my life, you know, I want my life to mean something. I want my life to be a life of significance. You guys as young adults, you're asking yourself, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to be known for? How am I going to leave my mark? What am I going to invest in? How am I going to spend the next 60 plus years of my life? What is the purpose going to be behind it? I'm 33, so I'm not that much older than you, but I'm at a stage in my life where I'm gratefully confident in the vocation I've chosen, but I still ask myself all the time, am I doing it well? Am I doing it properly? Am I focusing on the right things? Because I just have this one life. I'm very aware that I don't get a redo. And I want it to be of substance. I want it to be of worth. And we've talked, and there's jokes all the time for years and years about midlife crisis. And I think that's something that we're all going to get to a point where we continually ask ourselves. And then there will be one time in your life where you realize, like, oh, dang, I'm old. And there's a potential for this crisis. Is my life actually something that I'm proud of? Or is it my life something that I've really done everything I've wanted to do? All these questions come up all the time. And I think about that when I think about this portion and this inheritance and what we have to leave behind. And this idea, would I give up the idea of owning land or owning a business or doing these other things if it meant I have access to the presence of God? And I want that to be the case. How do I know that the Lord is my portion? And how do I rest joyfully in his portion being enough? It's interesting, King David in Psalm 16, if you guys have your Bibles, I want to ask you to turn there. He says that. He declares it. He says, the Lord is my portion. And King David played a very different role than the Levites, although they both had priestly aspects to them. But King David, he's a king. He had this incredible wealth. He had anything he wanted, anything he could ask for. And yet he declares in Psalm 16:5, he says, the Lord is my portion. And he goes on in Psalm 16:11, and he says, you make known to me the path of life, in your presence, there's fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. How did he get there? I want to break down this psalm together tonight, because I want to get there. And just so you guys know, I really enjoy the presence of God. I'm not like freaking out or anything. But it's something that the Lord's revealed to me that I need to really press into. And I know there's even greater joys that I've not tapped into. and I want to. So Psalm 16, you guys there? It starts with this. It says, preserve me, O God. Preserve me. And we don't know yet what David wants to be preserved from, what he wants to be saved from. But David starts this psalm by just crying out, Lord, preserve me, save me. And this is in many ways the cry of my heart. Like, I want my life to be something that is saved or preserved, that could be passed down, which is weird. And I want to get to, like, not all of that's good, but I want to break that down. And that's where he starts. He says, preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. He goes, God, I want you to save me, but I'm going to you for protection. What is a refuge? Right? It's a place you go to for protection, for security, for comfort. It can vary, right? When you're a little kid, refuge is your parents, right? You run to them, whatever's going on, and you find just security in their arms. And it doesn't really matter what else is going on. You find just peace there. Here David is saying, I want you to save me, and to you I go for that. And so my question for us is, where do we find refuge? Where is a place you run to for protection, for security, and for comfort? And we could do this in things. We could do this in possessions. You know, something shakes us and we think, oh, that's okay because in my bank account, I have this much. We could find refuge in our strength. Like, oh man, I messed up there, but I know that I could talk my way out of it. Or I know I have the skills necessary to make up for it. We could find refuge in pedigree, right? Like, I know that's not good, but because I have this title, or because I'm part of this family, or because you name it, we could find refuge in a lot of different things. Work, fortune, time. But if the Lord's going to be our portion, if he's going to be our supply, then we have to recognize that he provides something that all those things fail in. That security and refuge in the Lord is the only place where we're going to have, like everything else is fragile. Everything else can be lost. Your health can be gone. None of us know if we're going to be alive tomorrow, in a week. We can't promise that. But the Lord never changes. God, it needs to be our primary source of refuge. David goes on and he says, I say to the Lord, you are my Lord, and I have no good apart from you. It's interesting there. He says, I say to the Lord, that all caps is Yahweh. So he's saying, I say to the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I say to the Lord of our faith, the founder of our faith. But then he goes on, you are my Lord. And that word is Adonai. That means master. And he's saying, I say to you, Lord, you are my master. You are in control of my life, and I have no good apart from you. What are the things that we can point to in our life that we say, hey, this is from God? And is there anything that you point to and you say, and this is mine? Or this is of my doing? Like, God provided this, and I provided this. Or this I have kept from him. In fact, I think we could do this a couple different ways. We could either own something that's not ours to own. Like, we take credit, I did that. Or we keep things out of his reach. Meaning, we don't submit this area of our life fully to him. We don't recognize this area as he's master over this area of our life. And David here, he's building up to a place where he recognizes that the Lord is his portion. And more than that, he finds pleasure in God forevermore. And it happens as he finds refuge in God, as he's recognizing that these are the things I can go to you for. And there's no part of my life that is untouched by your goodness. We studied in James 1:17, every good gift is from the Father above. Do you recognize in your life that every good thing you have is from God? And if not, if there's something that you're like, but this is mine, then I don't think that's true, right? I think that's something you're telling yourself, but either it is not of God, or it's something that we are failing to recognize God's influence and provision in. And that to the degree we do that, to that degree, we are going to be hindered in receiving God as our portion. David goes on. He says, as for the saints in the land, they are excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. He's saying, I find such joy in God's people. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out or take their names on my lips. I'm not going to worship the things they worship. I'm not going to do the things they do. They're just going to, their pain, their sorrow is going to multiply. But verse 5, for the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. You hold everything I own. And the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. What David's saying there is, like, I trust that you are sovereign. You are in control of it all. You're in control of the people I know. And the people I know that are walking in your ways, man, they are a blessing to me. And the people I know that are not walking in your ways, man, they are dealing with consequences and the pain of their sin. But over all of that, over all that I have, everything I could point to, you're in control of it all. Not only are you my refuge, not only are you my treasure, not only do I recognize that every good thing that I have is from you, but now you are also my sovereign Lord. I trust that going forward, and as far as I could look back, you are in control. Verse 7, and I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. David says here, you are my trusted counselor. And I think about this portion that was given to the Levites and how part of me longs for this other portion. And I start asking myself, okay, to what degree am I going to this other portion for refuge or for treasure? Or for counsel? Or to what degree am I going to this other thing and trusting that that is actually going to bring a control or an ability that God can't? David here, he says, I need you to save me. I need you to preserve me. And then he starts just praising God and worshiping God and recognizing that God is the place he goes to for all of these things. And as he does that, a transition, a change is happening in his heart. And then he gets to this place in verse 8 where he says, I have set the Lord always before me because he is at my right hand and I will not be shaken. How does a guy who begins a psalm saying, preserve me, save me, get to a place where he is with such confidence saying, I will not be shaken? And it happens as he worships God and as he recognizes that God has these titles in his life. He is my refuge. He is my strength. He is my treasure. He is my counsel. And as he's declaring these things, he recognizes, I will not be shaken because I have in God all these things that nothing else could possibly provide. My portion is in the Lord. And I love how he says this. In verse 5, he said, my chosen portion. It's something that he is going to over and over again. I like the way John Piper said it, that this psalm begins with aching and it ends with affirmation. And that is a result of David worshiping God and declaring who God is over his life. Let's wrap it up. He says here in verse 9, Therefore, because you're all these things, therefore, because you play these roles in my life, my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. You know, it's interesting, verses 10 and 11, or rather 10, they say that's a prophecy talking about Jesus. If you read in Acts 2, Peter quotes it, because technically David's body does see corruption. And so in this psalm, as he's declaring these things, he knows that God is going to be there and God's going to be there for all eternity, but he's not exactly sure what that's going to look like. And Jesus properly fulfills this, but because Jesus fulfilled it, eventually David's will be resurrected. And David will spend all eternity with Jesus. And so he doesn't get it exactly right, but he's pointing to something even greater, which is further testament that our portion in the Lord is going to bring something beyond what we can imagine and way beyond anything that this earth can provide. You know, in Joshua 13, it says, but to the Levites, they do not receive an inheritance, not in land. It says, for the Lord is their inheritance. And they were set apart because they played a special role. They were priests. They were called to be the mediators between God and Israel. You are called to be a priest. That's a role that we have picked up in the New Testament. It's a weird one. You're like, what in the world does that mean? Do I wear fancy robes? Do I have to take incense and all that? No. We now have this opportunity to interact with God, to come and serve him. We now have an opportunity to bring him before others. And the role of priests expanded throughout the Old Testament because it began as the people who would set up the tabernacle and then they would tear it down and carry it to the next place. But then it started becoming people, they would worship God. In fact, the priests often, you would read that they would go before singing great hymns and songs of praise. And then at other times they would teach the people what God's word said. And then at other times they played administrative roles. You see, the role of the priest continued to expand as God used them to teach others who he was and to demonstrate his goodness. We are called to be priests. 1 Peter 2:9 says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. We are called to pick up that role. So we are called to serve God and to be used by God to serve other people and demonstrate who he is. That's not a small task. That's not something that we should take lightly. But to do that properly and with the greatest efficacy or the greatest influence, we need to do what the Levites did. We need to understand that God is our portion. Here's the catch. We can go buy land. You could go, not in this market, no one can. We can't own stuff. We could create businesses. We could go create something of substance that we can go and rely on. If we're not careful, here's the thing. The rich young ruler went to Jesus and said, Jesus, I want to follow you. And he said, fine, you could follow me. Go and sell everything you own, and then come and follow me. And he didn't do it. He chose those possessions. Now we can come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I want to follow you. But Jesus doesn't always tell us in a loud voice, hey, sell everything. Or he doesn't tell us in the very least, because I do believe that there's a place for us to own businesses and to be successful and to have influence through even wealth and all these things. But they can never be our portion. They can never be the things that we go to for refuge or for counsel or for reliance or to point to and say, look, my life is good because of this, 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 and this. Because to that degree, they're not our portion. And to that degree, the influence we have, the ability to be priests as God has called us to be, is diminished. Because we're not relying on God, we're relying on those things. David said, you are my chosen portion. So what we need to do is we need to choose. Especially now, I don't think any of us have a lot of wealth. And to be fair, a lot of us don't have a lot to point to. We need to choose as those things build up, that they are not going to take God's place as our portion, as the thing we rely on and go to. You know, many of us have friends that have substantial inheritances to leave. They're wealthy. Substantial businesses that they could stand on, and they're influential. Many of us have people like that we know and recognize. But you also know this. You know those people that have those things, and yet they're different than everyone else that has them. Like I know of people within this church that have money, but they don't own that money and hold on to it the way most of the world does. They're incredibly generous. I know people who have influence, but they don't hold on and use that influence to puff themselves up or to give themselves greater influence. But they think, how can I use this position that I have in order to expand the kingdom of God or to get God's ways implemented in our country and in our politics and in the school system in all these different ways. They do that because the money and the influence they have is not their portion. It's not what they go to and what they point to as this is what defines me. The Lord is their portion. And so and because of that, because they're willing to have those things but not own them or rely on them as refuge and counsel and things that they could lean back on to an unhealthy degree. Because of that, they get to step into this role as priests in a really substantial and significant way. People look at them and they recognize, they see something is different about them. And they have these opportunities to represent God to those people. That's what we can do as priests. That's the opportunity we have in America despite everything going on. We have this ability to serve and worship God and to be used by Him to reach others. And so my prayer is this, and the band can come up. My personal prayer is this, and you can make this your own if you want. Lord, I want everything I own, and even this goal, these hopes, these dreams that I have, this idea that I want this chunk of land. I don't want it to be an idol, but Lord, may you use it, this dream, because it's nothing yet. This dream, can you use it in such a way that my life can better demonstrate who you are, so that my witness will be louder for your glory and for your goodness. And otherwise, don't let me have it. Otherwise, I don't want it. If it's going to trip me up, then I would rather have you. And I know this, that one day I'm going to enter into heaven and I'm going to be able to worship God. And a lot of that's not going to matter. But the portion that I have here in the Lord, that I will have in heaven. Like that I'm going to be able to keep. My reliance, my refuge, my trust, my faith in who Jesus is. The way the Lord's going to change my heart and the way the Lord changes your heart is as we go to him in worship. As we declare these things over and over again. So I want to end tonight by asking you guys to stand up. And I want to ask you, I'm going to pray in a minute, but as I pray, if you read these verses and you think, man, I feel a little bit bad for the Levites, then I want to encourage you especially to come forward and worship. But if you also, part of you has thought, man, I really want, and you fill in the blank with any possession or any title or any pedigree, and you feel like I need to really give that up, then come forward and worship. Because as we worship, God will change our hearts.